Welcome everyone for the workshop this afternoon, or still this morning. Brian, are you going to run this and do the introductions?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'll be running it and do the introductions. So this is a short presentation about the proposed changes to temporary traffic management practice. And we have Cara Lauder and Ryan Cooney also on the call from Waka Kotahi, who towards the end of this slideshow will also be able to make some comment on the plans and answer questions. So I'll kick off. It's quite a short slideshow. So currently we have, well, for the last 15 or 17 years, we have a code of practice for temporary traffic management, which is used pretty uniformly across New Zealand. And recently, Waka Kotahi has proposed some changes to the way we do traffic management, temporary traffic management. Okay. Page down. Why is it not going down now? There we are. So I'll just cover the need for change, what's proposed, what the potential impacts are, and a response to that. So Waka Kotahi have, through the Road to Zero program, highlighted a need for road safety improvement. We know that there is a risk to road workers and the public when there is roadworks or events or other activities happening on roads. We know even within Waipa district, every year when we're doing road work, we probably have one or two crashes where people fail to slow down or slide off the road on loose chip and things like that. So we know it does happen. We know there is a risk there. Waka Kotahi have identified that the risk is not managed adequately under the current system and under the current code of practice. And I make that statement myself personally because it's not actually explicitly stated like that in the new guide, but it is clear that things do need to change. So what is proposed then? It's more of a risk-based approach, and certainly Council's very familiar with that. We have our risk management committee and risk templates and risk assessment processes for Council projects and operations. So that same sort of risk approach is proposed in the new guide to temporary traffic management. So Waka Kotahi recently published that guide as a draft for consultation and feedback. So they've stated that they want it to align better with the Health and Safety at Work Act, and for there to be greater accountability from all of those involved with providing temporary traffic management, and particularly for the lead contractor who has to assess the risk and prepare and approve a temporary management plan under the new guide. So that's what's proposed, a greater focus on a risk-based approach and less of a formulaic approach, which is perhaps more common under the current practice. So the potential impacts of that, it's certainly quite a substantial change to the systems that we've grown used to and that we have adapted our systems for. And within Council, we have one staff member who is dedicated to receiving traffic management plans and reviewing them and approving them and coordinating activities. So this is quite a substantial change for all of the local authorities across the country and for all of the contractors who do any work on roads. So that includes our Parks and Reserves team who do gardening work, the utility contractors who repair power poles and telephone cables and things like that. So under the new guide, there will be greater visibility of the risks involved, and from that we believe improved safety, but the system change is likely to increase costs. Certainly in my experience, when the current code of practice manual came into being back in the early 2000s, there was a substantial change in the way it was done, and there were substantially increased costs as a result of that. So this system change is very likely to cause increased costs. We know that the industry at the moment and the level of skill there is under strain already. Getting traffic management plans prepared and approved and through the system can sometimes be a drag on getting projects underway because there often aren't enough resources and skills in the industry to deliver this. So it's certainly going to put a strain on that. So council's response. So councils up and down the country are looking at the new guide, and roading managers like myself and traffic management coordinators have been talking and sharing information, and we do share a concern about the impacts and the costs of this change, that they're not well understood, that it could certainly cost a lot more than what people are thinking. There's also a concern that temporary traffic management, which under the Copton Manual, Code of Practice Manual, has got a lot of standard plans and arrangements for delivering work. So people seek relative consistency across the country. We're concerned that that may not be the case under the new guide. While the standard signs that are approved under traffic regulations for roadworks, the colour of them, the size, all of those things would stay the same. Contractors could choose to do things differently in future under a risk-based approach. So we're a bit concerned that industry may struggle to implement the new guide. It may be easy for the very experienced contractors, but for smaller contractors, it will probably introduce difficulty to understand, come to grips with it. They're not trained in risk assessment, and the smaller contractors may well struggle and have to rely on professional contractors to do it where they have managed to do it themselves in the past. The transition to the new system is unclear, and consultation to date has not really been adequate. And I say that politely, knowing that our Waka Kotahi counterparts are in on this call, but we know that it has caught us by surprise, that it is a major change and with potential major cost implications and system implications, and local authorities don't seem to have been that involved in the preparation or the promulgation of this change. So that's where the slideshow stops, and I will stop sharing it there, and we will give a chance for Ryan and Lara to make any comments that they've got here. Cara, sorry. You just need to unmute yourselves.
We've just got one question before that starts. Roger Gordon had his hand up for a while. So Roger, did you have a question of Brian before we hear from Waka Kotahi?
Yeah, it would be good if I may, Your Worship. Thanks, Brian, and very interested in our response, and I can understand a lot of the rationale behind those 4 points that you've got there. I have a couple of questions just to clarify my understanding. The first is, can we have a lot of events around Cambridge, particularly with cycling, etc. Can you give me some examples of how these new requirements could affect those road management requirements for those events?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to say, actually, Roger. There definitely would be changes because the new guide would be I guess become best practice for the country for all event holders who are having to prepare and implement temporary traffic management. And I would imagine a lot of the traffic management companies that the event organisers rely on to do it would probably only want to work with the best practice guide, as it were, or the accepted guide. Otherwise, they would be exposing themselves to additional risk. So event holders would need to work with their traffic management suppliers, evaluate those risks, and then prepare a plan for temporary traffic management. So those additional steps and potential risk management changes could well increase the cost of the temporary traffic management they have to provide. And even if it was only over the first couple of years where everybody came to grips with the new system and truly worked out what it meant, you could expect that there would be some delays and additional costs to do that. Longer term, it may settle down to a new routine where that happens more smoothly.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, what you're actually saying is there that nobody knows what the implications of this could be.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman, it certainly does introduce some uncertainty, I think.
Yeah.
And I guess anything new always does, and a system change always does introduce some uncertainty. But the existing Copton manual, after 15 or 17 years, people do know their way around it and know how to work it. So that sort of relearning would have to happen under the new system.
Okay. My second question is, and you mentioned that you were aware of some incidents that had happened on shingle and things like that. But if we were to look at those road closures, which are substantial, over, say, the last 3 years for events, how many incidents have we actually recorded in our district for events?
Yeah. So incidents on events are certainly less than when we're doing physical works, and that's often because the road environment doesn't change too much. I'm aware of, certainly some temporary traffic management suppliers or some organisers of events who have cut corners and have not had enough skilled staff out there as marshals or delivering the temporary traffic management. We've certainly seen that with some cycle races, where unskilled people have been marshals at corners and effectively trying to stop traffic without appropriate signage to let cyclists go through. So to change the give-way rules at intersections without proper controls. So those are typical incidents that we've found with less experienced or less well-resourced event suppliers that we've had to deal with.
Oh, so have we actually had some incidents?
We haven't, to my knowledge, not serious injuries or vehicle crashes, but certainly near misses and incidents of concern.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian.
Lou,
did you have a quick question of Brian before we move?
Just wanted to actually speak quickly to say that Roger raised a very, very valid point. One thing that I just wanted to ascertain from you, Brian, was that we will actually individually, as sports people, have to allocate our TMP or traffic management plans for every year, that they will be risk orientated. So therefore we can't just use an existing TMP. We would have to re-implement it and on a risk basis of how many people. And remember, this will go as a cost to all of those sports organisations and other organisations that will actually impose on the ability to run them. So simply, it's going to have quite an immense effect. So it's just something that I wanted to raise quickly, having organised quite a number of events myself.
Thanks, Lou. Okay, well, there's probably going to be some more questions or comments later, but Cara, is it you or Ryan taking the lead here?
More Ryan than me. I'm just the local person, so Ryan's the main author of the guide, so I'll leave most of it to him.
Ryan.
Thank you all. I thought I might, and thank you, Cara, for, yes, I'm the author of the guide. I have been the one beavering away to write this new document in collaboration with a number of my colleagues and We hear the point that's been raised around consultation. We might come back to that one in just a moment, though. So I might start by highlighting the motivation. So as Brian did an excellent job of talking about, there is a number of incidents, etc., happening around the country. In the last 5 years, there has been 35 people die at work sites and around 145 reported serious injuries. So a serious injury is a hospitalisation event for some time. That reported number is likely to be around 2 to 3 times lower than the actual number. We know this from analysing statistics associated with events like that, or serious injuries. So we're motivated by the fact that there's been a lot of fatalities. I appreciate that, there's not large numbers in every one council, but there is a large number across the country. So I just want to reinforce that point. The second point I'd like to reinforce is that we're not consistent with the Health and Safety at Work Act and its requirements around who takes leadership in the sector. White Island is a case in point. I'm actually a Downer employee that's seconded to Waka Kotahi, although I've had history with Waka Kotahi directly. I've also worked for councils. Basically the key message that comes through is that every time there's been a fatality or a serious injury on a site, it is the lead contractor that's been prosecuted. So the CEOs, of whom sit on a governance group that I report to, are all highly motivated to basically stop turning up at funerals. They are really uncomfortable with the fatalities, etc., that have occurred. So they really want to try and up the game and do something different. And there was the comment a moment ago about relatively prescriptive methods that everybody understood to, shall I say, trying to do the right thing. And fascinating questions from councillors Lou and Roger around the understanding this idea of what risk really is and how often things occur on the network. And have we got this balance right? So I might challenge a couple, or just pass on a couple of ideas as challenge here, that the Code of Practice for Temporary Traffic Management was written primarily for road construction. It is not well designed for events. I'll make a slightly cheeky comment, but I have a tattoo of a bicycle on my hand. I'm that much of a keen cyclist. I've just ridden 420 kilometres around Central Otago. And so I empathise quite a lot with the comments around events. But I would also highlight that waste collection and working near railway lines, etc., they're all quite different environments. And if we have this, dare I say it, cookbook style approach, we're not setting up people for success very well, which is another point of motivation for this change. So I've explained motivation for change, and then the elephants in the room, cost and skill and capability of the sector. We are already seeing some opportunity for cost reduction. I can speak more to that if there's a question around it, but we also know that in a number of circumstances, costs will need to increase. And so in speaking with my colleagues, such as Kara, who run programs of works, we think that there will be definitely some cost increase, and there will be some opportunity for cost reduction. The net balance, uncertain at this point in time. So fair observation of Brian and accepted point. And I guess the last thing is around the skill and capability and the readiness for this change. The tier 1 sector, the Fulton Hogans, Downers, etc., have made the point that this is quite a step up in capability and skills. We're essentially asking these contractors to have, in the temporary traffic management design phase, the skills of a permanent road designer, or at least a good subset thereof. And that is a big gap. But that gap is part of the problem as to why we end up in these situations with either poorly derived temporary traffic management or ultimately failure and death. So we acknowledge that there's some time to work through around that change. To reassure you, our intention is not to say you must use it from such and such date. To be really blunt, we can't. There is no legislation that says that you must use the Code of Practice or the New Zealand Guide. They would be seen as industry best practice documents. We'd highly recommend or you use them, but it's ultimately your choice. And I guess what we're, with the launch of, or making available, I will try and be very careful with my language here, we would make it available. And then what we are doing with our contractors is working through a readiness exercise. When would a contract or a particular region be ready to move to this new way of working? And that'll come down to the capability and understanding of the clients, such as Cara, or the contractor themselves and the skills that they hold internal to their organisations, etc. So this will be quite a gentle rollout. We think it could take up to 5 years to change the way in which the sector works on this basis. But it all comes back to lots of people being hurt or killed and wanting to be aligned with legislation. It's not a good place to be if we're not aligned with legislation. So hopefully that's a useful little additional anecdote. I will pause there.
Thanks, Ryan. Bruce, question.
Thank you, Jim. Ryan, just a question that bugs most of us going on, doesn't matter which road it is. There's roadworks taking place. So many months later, all this temporary signage is still there or fallen over. Does the lead contractor have responsibilities for picking that up? Because I think a lot of people now don't look at the signs just for that sake. Oh, nothing's happened. It's temporary. It's been there just about a year, but no one's picked it up.
Yes, that message has been part of the temporary traffic management systems for some time, is that if we want people to respect the signage and to respond to it well, then we need to not leave it there when it's not necessary. So absolutely, and so I lead the team that had the temporary traffic management coordinators for the rebuild of Christchurch. I was heavily involved in that for 5 years. So I was CCC's representative at that point in time, and it was a constant message. So Brian, encourage teams to remove it from the site, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Bill.
Kia ora koutou. Kia ora, Ryan. Kia ora, Cara. I think we've met before. I'm not sure exactly where, but one of those other hats that I probably wear in my chairmanship of Ngāti Apakura Runanga Trust. So you may have been along to Ngāiwi Tōpu at some point and had a bit of a kōrero with us there. But if you haven't, then I'd certainly invite you as the local to come along and have a kōrero with us at Ngāiwi Tōpu. If I might just start, Ryan, by recognising the lives that have been lost on our roads, and those that, you know, and as you say, a lot of them have been workers. Workers' lives are very important because, you know, behind them is the whole whānau that then you know, has to deal with that, the loss of that life. And I know that you've talked openly just before about the CEOs, but there are behind all of those workers, there are whānau, and for Māori families particularly, those are quite big. So significant costs in that regard. I just, in terms of this consultation that's occurring that you're talking about, I am interested to hear what's happening in regards to Māori and for that consultation, because I've heard I do coordinate Māori events in and around the Waipa, and have for a long period of time used our Māori wardens, who I believe are to some degree concerned about what might be happening in this space, and you know, recently signalled to me that they might not be able to do the management plan and our work for an event that we have every year to commemorate Rangi Awhia. So I'd be interested to know whether, you know, Waihi Kotahi is working with Māori providers in terms of these safety organisations that you talk about. Again, with Lou and others of the council have mentioned, I will be looking out for the readiness proposal that you talk about, and particularly the cost reduction. I'm interested to know, you say there's an opportunity for cost reduction. Is that at the end of the 5-year period, Ryan? Or is it is there a cost reduction? Is there a what can I, you know, how can I describe it? Is there funding available to assist you know, groups that are big supporters of our events? Where does you know, are you just putting this there and expecting it without offering any pūtea towards supporting it, especially to the group that I represent on this council, which is Māori.
Okay, number of questions there, so I will do my best to respond. I'll answer the most difficult one first, which is around the engagement with Maori, and suffice to say, we have not directly reached out and engaged with Maori, so accept that point and feedback, and I will take that back to my team. However, if I may, there is recognition of volunteers providing services. So with respect to Brian, he made the comment about volunteers operating on for cycling events, and whatever the activity is, ultimately it's the organiser's responsibility to make sure that people are safe and to make sure that the staff that are representing them with events are appropriately capable. This comes back to the Health and Safety at Work Act and the idea that the employer is responsible for making sure their staff are capable and competent. Right now, we're relying on Waka Kotahi to issue permits to say you're capable and competent, and I've seen personally the inverse of that, where somebody has a piece of paper or a warrant card and does not have the aptitude to operate on a site. They found it too stressful and had to take a moment for themselves in the truck cab to recompose themselves. So we're basically, as Waka Kotahi, we're recognising we're not actually particularly well placed to determine if somebody has the aptitude, has the competence to work on site. And so what we're looking at doing, this is just a proposal that we haven't even worked up for ourselves yet, but we're thinking around, we continue to provide technical training, but as for aptitude and competence, that remains the responsibility of the employer. That employer conversation gets a little more challenging when they're voluntary organisations. However, WorkSafe does have some material around that on their website. So I joke about my tattoo, but I'm president of a cycling club in Christchurch, and we take the sense that we are obliged to do everything we reasonably possibly can to look after people and their lives. And so, volunteer or otherwise, we act as though we're a professional organisation. So that's hopefully useful points. I think the third one is, I threw out there the comment around cost reduction. I know of one really good example right now, and it comes back to creative thinking. This is where moving away from the cookbook style approach to life. So with the Auckland motorways, the mowing of the grass on the verge has traditionally been undertaken with staff using weed eaters or tractors or ride-on lawnmowers, etc. They have come across a product which is a remote controlled lawnmower. So basically the idea is we have the lawnmower close to the traffic, but the operator is well away from the traffic. And so therefore there's no need to put the attenuator truck on the road. There's no need for all the cones and signs on the road, and both lanes of the motorway can be left open. If somebody was to crash into this lawnmower, it would basically be within the capabilities of a car's crumple zone, etc., to be able to accommodate that. So there's an opportunity to remove workers from the line of fire. There's an opportunity to remove temporary traffic management from the road, which actually reduces risk to the worker, to the public, and quite a substantial cost-saving opportunity. It's only one example, so I appreciate that we have to be careful with that statement, but we hope that what will happen is that people will keep using their creative mindset to find ways to achieve safety. I might use this as an opportunity to refer to there's a concept in the highway Health and Safety at Work Act that talks about eliminating risk before you move into physical controls, before you move into training and PPE. And essentially it relies on this idea that putting on your vest is the last thing you do because it's the least effective way to keep you safe. The most effective way to keep you safe is to not be in the line of fire or to not be on the road in the first place. So having a remote control lawnmower and standing 20, 30 meters away from the road edge is a great way to eliminate that risk to that worker. So we encourage people to think about how that could be achieved as much as possible. If it can't be, then yes, there may be cost increases. Hopefully that's a useful little bit of feedback.
Thanks, Ryan. Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Look, while I understand about costs and potential damage to events, etc., I have to say that our New Zealand's workplace death and injury toll is completely unacceptable and has to be addressed. I know Health and Safety Act is meant to be doing that, and really is probably not been particularly effective. My view is the real reason for that is our own attitudes to safety. New Zealand has come from a can-do attitude, and that's great for getting things done, but sometimes in the process of getting those things done, they get killed and seriously injured. We don't give enough thought to the risks. In terms of traffic management, I was involved in a triathlon that was held annually at Whangamata. It no longer is for health and safety reasons, and quite frankly, rightly so. Too big a percentage of road users were totally intolerant of having a temporary road closure, even for a couple of hours, and would insist on using the road where cyclists are travelling at 70, 80 plus kilometres an hour, expecting that road to be empty. Yeah, it's and for volunteers to be having to deal with those situations who were untrained, it was dangerous. So the only thing I would ask you though is please consultation with people like Brian and Iwi, Maori. Yeah, let's do as much of that as we can in the process of getting this area a lot safer than it is. So I applaud you on your goals and aspirations with that, and all the best.
Thanks, Andrew. Were there any other comments? I don't see any. Look, just for me, I agree with Andrew's comments in terms of it's totally unacceptable, the deaths and injuries. But I just wonder, has there been any assessment done on, I suppose, the compliance with the existing rules? You know, it's, and look, we're all guilty. You see a 50k sign coming up for roadworks and you think, oh, if I slow down to 70, I'll be all right. And I suspect that probably if the existing rules had been complied with, then we probably wouldn't have as many deaths and injuries as we've got now. And I suppose it goes a bit further in that with our, I suppose, ACC rules, we can kill and impair with immunity from a personal responsibility perspective. So there's just no comeback on the driver if they're speeding through roadworks and kill somebody. It all seems to come back on the employer and obviously the impact on the individual. But look, yeah, it was just a question really. Have we been enforcing the existing rules enough? And would that have been sufficient to actually save a whole lot of changes?
Fantastic question. And what I might do is move away from just the New Zealand Guide to Temporary Traffic Management for a moment, because that is one project that's part of a broader road worker safety program that is underway. The governance group oversees that broader program. Yes, the speed compliance is horrendous. We have some statistics from a number of sites. All those digital signs that you see around, they often record real-time speeds. We are seeing something like 70% non-compliant with speed limits out there on the network, and generally, like you say, 70 on a 50k site, etc., 20-ish kilometres above. I'm paraphrasing, but it's horrendously poor. So yes, we know that that's terrible. So the program, the broader program includes things such as Waka Kotahi purchasing some speed, well, they're calling them safety cameras, so that they can be deployed on trailers at work sites. There's literally 2 of them being removed from the Waterview tunnel that are not currently in use to be put on trailers that we can use to run a trial to see if we can enhance compliance with speeds and influence the public. So if you see any funny looking trailers on the side of the road, you probably want to slow down. Hint. And the other part to this is also looking at what's the training and competency of the staff that are operating on the road network. A number of them, with the greatest respect to them, they are walking out and putting themselves in live lanes and taking other unnecessary risks. So this program is looking at everything across the road worker safety portfolio, from how do we influence the public, what do we do from a system perspective, and how do we train and influence the decisions of staff on the road. I'm sure I could spend another half hour talking to you about that, but I'm conscious of time. So hopefully that's a useful starting point.
Thanks, Ryan. Lou.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jim. I just wanted to ask one particular question. As an event organiser, you then become the principal contractor. Is that correct? As the club organising the event, or the president of that, or the chair of the board, you then become completely liable. Is that correct?
So WorkSafe have some fantastic material on this. If you were to research PCBUs working together, it talks about the contracting chain. So as the purchaser of services, you are called the contracting PCBU, which sounds really strange, but it is the client organisation. So Waka Kotahi would purchase, or the council would purchase, or the club would purchase services from a supplier. The lead contractor is the supplier. So think of this as the temporary traffic management providers, the Fulton Hogans, the Downers, etc. of the world, who supply services to the contracting PCBU. Interesting language, but yes, you've got a client, and the club will be a client, and they have obligations. There is that document I refer to, PCBUs working together on WorkSafe sites, is a good starting point. However, they are also, WorkSafe are producing a road and roadside workers health and safety good practice guide. It's quite a long title, so sorry about that. But and in there, they provide quite a lot of clarity around the contracting chain and the responsibilities of each of the different tiers within the structure that we have, that we put in place. So as a purchaser of service, you would be well advised to make sure that the organisation supplying services to you is capable and competent. So that's one of your primary goals, and that your procurement process doesn't inhibit them doing the best they can to look after the health and safety of the people that are on the road network, etc., etc. So hopefully that quickly clarifies.
Yeah, because quickly through you, Ryan, is that I just wanted to establish I am actually a member of a sports club, which has a number of clubs involved, including a cycling club. And we actually have that situation as a board, that we only have an overview of the individual clubs underneath. And it's just something to think about, that there is this leverage, or this point of disconnect. We are not actually avidly organising the event, or even do that. We only look at the funding side of it. They're just interested in the liability type.
So yes, I guess that's where it gets interesting, is who is the contractor or the client organisation. It sounds like in your description of the arrangements is that there is a club step down that is the one that's signing the contract, is purchasing the services from a different group. So they would be the ones, as best I'm aware, that would be have to fulfil the obligations of the contracting PCBU, the client. Event seems to be quite a popular topic, so I would just mention we've been working with Sports New Zealand, Cycling New Zealand, Triathlon New Zealand, Motorsports New Zealand, and there's a couple of others that escape my mind at the moment, around helping them set up to help their clubs. So I'm quite involved in Cycling New Zealand. I'm helping them out with a number of events, and also president of a club, and I'm tied into this in a little bit more than one ways. And yeah, they're very keen to try and help. Cycling New Zealand are very keen to try and help their cycling clubs, as an example, and by inference leads the motorsport, triathlon, etc. fraternity as well. So I'm obviously very keen to see them be successful, because it will provide opportunity and clarity and ease of operating for other clubs as well. Thanks,
Ryan. Okay, so where to from here, Brian? Ryan and Cara, I know that limited consultation, but are you looking for feedback from councils, or is it generally a fait accompli and you're just advising us what's about to happen?
I might quickly jump in. So the way we've been describing is this: there's legislation which is non-negotiable, the Health and Safety at Work Act. We've described a model or a set of relationships between the councils, the lead contractors, etc. That is up for feedback. And then there's the technical detail, what I will call the traffic engineering, geometric design. And again, that's up for feedback. So we very much openly welcome feedback from the community, the sector as a whole, which is from, there's a very broad group of people, from the Mower wardens through to the major tier 1 contractors and everything in between. So yes, please give us feedback.
Thanks, Ryan. So then back to you, Brian. What's our program for getting some feedback?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So roading managers have sort of worked together in the Waikato to provide some sort of technical input and feedback. But yeah, across the country, local councils have supplied feedback, and we have prepared some information and some feedback points for council, and it is really along those lines of those concerns about cost and transition and consultation, and understanding that this is a large system change for local authorities. So local authorities across the country would probably issue 90% or more of the temporary traffic management plans that are issued in the country, because there's far more on the local roads than there are on the highways, and all those events happen on the local roads. So we're probably in the hot seat, as it were, and having to implement the change over time. So those concerns I did talk about, cost and transition and how it will work, will be the sort of areas that we hope to work more closely with Waka Kotahi to get a good handle on, to understand, because there is this risk that things that are promoted by Waka Kotahi are often seen as best practice, or the lead the charge, and that's the way it should be as a national organisation. But we just need to make sure that local bodies do have the resources and the abilities to keep up, and that we don't end up in a situation where there's a two-tier sort of system, where the highways operate one way and all local authorities operate in a different way because we can't keep up. So those are the sort of submission points that we'd be putting forward.
Thanks, Brian. Claire, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, a comment really. I like just listening to the conversation, like there seems to be on workplace safety, and I'm just wondering if there's a distinction being made between the volunteer events that obviously it's not quite a workplace, and while the risk management approach applies to both of them, is there a way of accommodating that volunteer event kind of situation that's not going to stifle it and really perhaps make event organisers like question whether or not they should continue having events because they worry about the implications, and perhaps maybe there's going to be much more responsibility to demonstrate the safety, and how the system change is still going to protect or enable that sort of lower resourced and volunteer reliant kind of activity. So I don't know whether, Ryan, you've given thought to that, or if, Brian, you can foresee that there's going to be some tensions there, and whether or not we should be making that a strong point when we're giving feedback.
Perhaps I could answer that through you, Mr. Mayor. So already, I guess, we have event organisers come to us with plans to hold events, and as the road controlling authority, we've got a responsibility for the public out there, whether they're pedestrians or cyclists or motor vehicle drivers, that everybody's going to be safe. So we take that responsibility seriously, and if we're not happy with the plans they're putting forward, we can obviously veto it or require changes. and there really is, so no differentiation really between whether it's a work site or an event site. You've still got members of the public exposed to those risks. So we've got to treat them the same. So really it comes down to perhaps what Ryan was talking about. Is there a smarter way to do it? And, we close the streets completely for a Christmas parade because we can't have cyclists and cars and other things happening. So maybe sometimes for certain events, the only way to do it safely in the future might be to close the road to all traffic. So those different sort of options will have to be on the table.
Yeah, and you obviously feel that you can sort of operate in that given these system changes that are being signalled. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Bill.
Yes, sorry, thanks, Jim. I was just thinking then, Ryan and Cara, that a lot of our urupa are not near car parks. So what are we going to do there? Are we required to have road management plan in place for because people will have to park their cars along the side of the road where the urupa happens to be out in the middle of a paddock that we don't have any access ways to because of what's happened in our past. Are we going to be, and then there's pokai. There's the pokai that occur in the Waikato and in and around a lot of our marae. I do think that if there is to be consultation, and then that's a consultation that needs to occur sooner rather than later.
If I may, I think Brian just made a really good point, is that the council's primary obligation is to look after the community in which travels on those sections of road that are impacted. So if the proposal creates undue risk to the road users of all types, then the council has an obligation to think about them. The other side of it, which I think is where you were heading, Councillor, was around those who are participating in the event, or the workers on site, or whatever the case may be, and looking after their needs, their safety is the organiser or the employer's responsibility. So what we're trying to do as Waka Kotahi is stop telling you how to look after your people, but giving you tools to enable you to do it yourself. So we're trying to move away from thou shall do to you have obligations as both the road controlling authority and also the event organizer or the worker, the employer, and here's some tools to help you. Here's some information around design of how to set up a site, legal signs, etc., and then try and step away. I'll pause there.
That might be okay in either central or local government cemeteries where car parks are provided, but the situations I'm talking about, they're not provided to, Ryan. So yeah,
very much understand that, and I guess we could tell you how to keep yourself safe, but that will come with a cost implication, and with the greatest respect, I'm not sure that we know how to keep you guys safe, so we shouldn't be in there specifying the solution. It would be fantastic if you were able to come up with your own solution as the organiser of an event, whereas at the moment the code of practice puts Brian in a position for the particular way of working. So we're trying to not, as I say, tell you how to keep your participants safe.
Okay. Is there any other questions or comments anyone wishes to make? If not, well, thank you, Ryan, for coming along, and Cara. And we'll, Brian, you'll get back to us with any feedback that you want.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Hey, thanks for your time this morning. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks, Cara. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will try and share my screen with you. So thank you everyone for opportunity to bring you up to date with Three Waters reforms. Unfortunately, Martin is not with us this morning. He's been unwell over the Easter break and continues to not be well, so he can't join us this morning. So the workshop this morning is to basically provide a bit of an update on all of the work streams that are underway under the water reform umbrella. It's largely for information only, although there is an opportunity around funding at the end that I'm seeking any advice or guidance on. One thing I'm not covering off today is the work of Taumata Arawai, the water quality regulator, the water regulator, because Martin and Renee provided that update last month at the council meeting, and also Martin's provided that through his activity updates. So just working through all of the other work streams. So just a quick recap, the Minister of Local Government made her announcement in late 2021 that 4 water services entities would be established and that these are required to be operational by the 1st of July 2024. Prior to making that announcement, the Minister had an engagement period or a consultation period with local government. And in response to the issues raised, committed to the establishment of 3 working groups to look at those issues raised. So one in particular was around looking at governance and representation, which was raised by many councils during that period in October 2021. So you'll be aware that working group, their review was completed, the report was presented late February, early March, and the response was expected this month, and that's on the basis that the revised legislation giving effect to the announcement of 4 water services entities, or a number of water services entities, is to be presented to Parliament in May 2022. At this stage, we've still got some lack of clarity around the management of stormwater. Certainly in the exposure draft that was presented, it was still to be managed by the water services entities, but there has been various debate as to whether that is appropriate. So until we see that legislation, we're not sure where stormwater stands. So this is the timeline that the government's shared with us in March 2022. You'll see there, mid-2022, we're expecting May in terms of that first phase of the water services entities bill. There is note there that it will be sent through to select committee, although equally we are hearing that possibly it will be moved through the House under urgency. So we won't know until that kind of hits Parliament. As I said, an exposure draft was shared with the Governance and Representation Working Group, so that was available late last year. 2 stages of Water Services Entity Bill, number 1 and number 2. Number 1, we're expecting to give effect to the water services entities, and Bill number 2 will be mopping up any sort of consequential legislation requirements of other pieces of legislation that need to be amended to support the work of the water services entities. So the other 2 working groups that were established late last year, the Rural Supplies Technical Working Group, all about developing principles and sort of working together to manage impacts on rural drinking water suppliers and rural communities in terms of how the legislation should be shaped to appropriately reflect those concerns. Again, their report was due late April this year. And the linkages to the Resource Management Act, we've spoken previously in terms of the concerns around alignment and connection of the water services entities and still wanting to meet our growth requirements within our district and across New Zealand. Similar reservations were raised. So the planning working group is providing the DIA advice around supporting policy development, really about that intersection of role between the functions of the new water services entities and the resource management system. So the National Transition Unit, or the NTU, has been established by the DIA to start work in terms of getting ready for the water services entities. You may recall Heather Shotter, ex-Chief Executive of Palmerston North City Council, has been appointed as the leader of the NTU. So that they're well underway and have sent out a number of requests for information. People and Workforce was the first one that was received. That's been completed and submitted back to DIA, and the other two are underway. A number of councils are indicating significant struggles in terms of putting together the request for information responses, but here at Waipa we've certainly done some great work over quite a number of years. Our asset data is in pretty good shape, so our ability to respond to these RFIs at this stage is manageable. The National Transition Unit have also established a number of work groups. These are made up of seconded staff or staff from various councils who want to participate in technical working groups as a reference rather than an actual worker, and consultants as well as members of the DIA participating. So those are the work groups underway. Under the asset management and operations area, there is a specific data and digital group, and Martin is participating in that because he's respected nationally for his insights and knowledge and experience, particularly with the SCADA and telemetry systems. He's able to accommodate that at the moment alongside his other work, so there is no backfilling required at this stage. And equally, we have team members who are really keen to participate in the asset management operations wider technical working group, to be exposed to some of those discussions, as early as possible. So we certainly have staff who are keen to participate, but as always, it's this balancing of ensuring that we still continue to provide great services to our communities. So the National Transition Unit are obviously taking the national perspective of these establishment of the entities, looking at those things that need to be controlled and consistent on a national basis versus those things that should be allowed to be developed within a more local context. Ian Cathcart is our council interface manager. He's seconded currently from Waikato District, so as a council person for those of you who may know him. And he's just starting the discussion in terms of bringing a representative from from each council together just to start those good discussions. How we can support each other through these processes is kind of where those early discussions are starting at the moment. You may recall that when councils were requested to provide feedback to the Minister late last year, that across Entity B, councils and His Worship, our Mayor Jim, participated in this group. And that group is continuing to meet. So Mayor Holdham from New Plymouth District Council is the chair, and certainly a collective voice during that consultation phase last year. And again, it's an intelligence sharing and supporting network around discussions. We are also a very active member of Communities for Local Democracy. So this is a group of 31 councils who have joined together and have developed a 10-point plan and around, I guess, what the issues and concerns are with the full water services entities model, and particularly concerned that Three Waters assets should be continue to be owned by councils, either directly or through a much more realistic shareholding arrangement, and much more reflective of real asset ownership. So recently met with the Minister of Local Government, along with representatives of other parties. I don't know, Your Worship, if you want to make any additional comments on this one.
Yeah, look, thanks, Dawn. Maybe if you want to just continue your presentation, and I'll make some sort of general comments at the end.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of trying to keep staff, I guess, as connected to this process as possible, as I noted earlier, that we've received invitations for staff to work in groups, and as I said, that is attractive for some staff. There is still a high level of uncertainty around what the future holds for our staff. You know, for those who are 100% water staff, then they've been given a guarantee that their role will transfer into any future water services entity, but it's this term primarily waters. And so for a number of staff who may sit in our finance team or our HR team or our support services, who still, you know, predominantly provide services into the waters area, we're unsure exactly the situation that those people are in. Another piece of work that, in terms of response locally, that we're just needing to kick off is understanding our land holdings with respect to what the future holds around a water services entity, both land that is possibly providing dual purpose for both the waters, but also for our Parks and Reserves team, water catchment areas, those sorts of things. So we need to work through all of our land holdings and then understand what's the most appropriate strategic position for Waipa in terms of what that transition process might look like. The last item is one that there's been a bit of commentary over the last sort of couple of weeks, I guess, in terms of the Better Off support package. Overall, both the Better Off support package and the No Worse Off is around $2 billion, but only 500 million of this sits within the Better Off support package that is available at the moment. So tranche 1 funding available from the 1st of July, but applications are open at the moment. So 4th of April to the 30th of September. Of that 500 million, the notional amount, which is the amount that is seen as sort of targeted for Waipa District, is $5.24 million. And that's developed on the same basis. You may recall that our DIA funding available for delivering our waters projects when we signed up to the MOU in 2020 of 6.8 million. So it's the same criteria that sits behind it in terms of the amount of money, but our ability to invest that money into our community is much wider. So whereas the previous money was for waters infrastructure development projects only, this funding has a much wider criteria around transition around sustainable, low emission economy, addressing climate change, enabling more affordable housing or development and growth opportunities, but very much around supporting local placemaking and overall community wellbeing. There's been some discussion in the media in terms of whether the funding is available even for those councils who have signalled that they do not support the waters reform as proposed. LGNZ have certainly confirmed that accessing this funding does not preclude councils from holding a position on the reforms. So that's as strong as we have. I know a couple of councils have indicated they're seeking a legal opinion on that, but I haven't been able to secure that as yet, I'm afraid. However, I think the court of public opinion needs to be considered in this space as well. As I say, the funding applications are only open until the 30th of September for this first amount. But if we don't take up that 5.24 million, it will flow through to being available with the tranche 2 funding, which won't be available until after the 1st of July 2024. So the only risk there is if, for whatever reason, if there either a change of government or a change of government direction as to whether that second tranche of funding is no longer available after 2024, then if we haven't secured this funding now, what is the risk? So that's just something we need to consider. And then what projects we might look at considering. And certainly, here on Waipa, we've obviously got our urban mobility package that's looking for funding. We've got cycleway projects that are looking for philanthropic or fundraising to support them, and equally Te Arawai. So we've got a number of candidate projects that could be considered, but as I say, it's a matter of considering whether taking up the funding at this stage is the right thing to do. So I see a number of hands, so I don't know, Your Worship, if we want to pause at that point.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. I saw Roger's come up first, then Claire, and I think Mike's got his hand up, although I can't see him on the screen at the moment. Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Thanks, Dawn. And I think that comment that you made about change in government and the funding in future not being available, I really do feel that we should take advantage of that resource while it's available now and grab what we can. So totally support that. But also, obviously, because of the Waka Kotahi having withdrawn their support for our urban mobility development, I think the use of some of that fund, or an application for use of some of that fund, really would meet that transition to sustainable and low emission economy. So I'd very much support trying to replace the Waka Kotahi commitment with some of that funding that's available through this process. So yeah, support that. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Well, I'd be at the other end of the spectrum to Roger. I'm absolutely totally opposed to us participating in the Better Off support package, even though it'd be nice to have, that 5 million. But honestly, where's it coming from? That money comes from future water charges. Now, if we proposed to our ratepayers, like this coming financial year, that we were going to raise $5 million by increasing water charges and spending it on cycleways, there'd be complete outrage. Now, this is the same thing that's being proposed by central government. And so I just will not support this at all. In fact, I think that there should be, a great outcry that it's even proposed. So it's not really, I mean, even though it's always nice to think we could spend the money somehow, but where is the source of money coming from? It's from future water charges. So it's not okay from my point of view. The other thing
just on that, I'll cut across you there, Claire, just
okay.
on that, on that point, and maybe Dawn can help us. My understanding and recollection was that this $2 billion that that was coming forward as a no worse off package, theoretically, there was about 500 million that was actually a government funding, and the balance, the $1.5 billion in round figures, was actually, as you correctly point out, was increase in charges. So that we just need some clarification on whether this first 500 is in fact increases in water charges. But whatever happens, it's public funds, so it's going to come out of your taxes one way or another. So the principle's right. But Dawn, I don't know if you've got any more information on that.
No, sorry, Your Worship, I don't in terms of that breakdown, but certainly we can investigate.
Yeah.
Maybe-
Okay. Sorry to cut across, Claire.
Oh yeah, it's in full flight. But yeah, I guess it would, precisely the source of that funding. That 5 million that we'd be looking at, because if it's, I mean, the idea is that it would come from the water charges, so they wouldn't reduce by the amount that the savings would justify, or the alleged savings. And so that's why I'm opposed to it. And there were just two other points that I wanted to put forward. And the first was the statement that stormwater, where should responsibility of stormwater lie? And I'm really shocked that government thinks it's okay to delay that decision until such time as they're going to introduce the draft legislation. Honestly, we need clarity well ahead of that time. We need to know as soon as possible, because from my understanding of stormwater, it's incredibly complex and really closely intertwined with roading and new developments. And I personally struggle to see why it would be a good idea for a water entity to look after it. I think it makes a lot more sense for it to stay with local authorities. But yeah, I'm pretty shocked that it looks like it's going to be a late decision as to whether or not it's going to be in or out, and I don't think it bodes well for the whole process. And lastly, I'm still incredibly disappointed generally that the questions that were raised really right at the beginning of this reform process have not been answered by central government. Like, I did quite a long list to the DIA and never got any answers back. And in particular, the thing that's really bugging me is that there are funding vehicles that are available to local authorities to be able to finance new and improvements to service levels for things like water infrastructure. They're used successfully overseas. The Castalia reports mentioned them, in particular revenue bonds. And we've never been given an answer as to why we can't have access to those kind of tools, which would really alleviate a lot of the difficulties with local authorities being able to manage their water assets and invest. Yeah, so I just wanted to get that off my chest. So that's me. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Mike, and then Bruce, and then I'll come back to you, Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jim. This is a question, I guess, for Dawn. So if it continues as present and we basically lose control of our water assets, and therefore I'm assuming we're losing control possibly of the land around them. And I'm just thinking it's a bit left field, but this third bridge, if it ever gets identified, and if it was, say, going through the sewage treatment plants that Waipā own the land of, will we lose a right of control to have an option of a bridge or anything really, not just a bridge, but do we lose control of putting our assets over the top of land that becomes part of us, the water assets that are going to be stripped away from us, I guess?
Through your worship, I guess it's difficult to comment on that at this stage in terms of what mechanisms will be utilised. Will it in fact be the land remain in council's ownership in a lease arrangement, or will it in fact be the handing over? So I think that's something we'd need to work through in terms of that piece of work that I was trying to refer to, as to going through understanding all of those land holdings and then working through what is in council's best interests as to how they're managed into the future.
I'm just thinking of our submission that we put in. I'm just not sure, and it's too late now, obviously, whether we put anything in to at least ask that question or address sort of not snookering ourselves in the future. So if we didn't put it in there, just as long as it's, I guess it'd be nice to have an answer to that, because it's potentially quite for Waipā and for Cambridge, it's a big asset that one day will be built probably, and I would hate to see a possible, place for this piece of infrastructure, this bridge to go, being stripped away from us in terms of eligible to actually use it.
Yeah, Mike, I think, and Dawn's obviously commented, there's one of the issues that really concerns me, and obviously Claire in her comments, is that there's so much that we don't actually understand at the moment in the level of detail, and we're just continually told, oh, we've got to work through that detail. They're not minor details, they're really significant details that impact not on just us, but the whole country. So we're just following along blindly, pretty much, would be my interpretation of it. But anyway, Bruce, and then I'll go back to Roger.
Thank you, Dan. Dawn, my concerns, and I don't know if you can help out with the rural supplies and planning working groups, how far are they going into it? Are they not picking on individual farm supplies, are they? Surely. Okay, that's good. Is that a confirmation?
Sorry, through your worship, I think Taumata Arawai have obviously got a long journey in terms of understanding those rural water supplies, and obviously they're starting with some of the much larger ones, but okay, will over that 5-year transition period have a better understanding of the smaller ones. But with respect to this work group, no, it's much more of that interface with the legislation to make sure it's appropriate for the water services entities.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Roger.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jim. I just wanted to say I agree with Claire's frustration and concern over the lack of response and the lack of information that this government is providing back to us to really enable us to go forward on an informed position. And just regards to the funding of the 500 million, I appreciate also Claire's comment there. But if all of the other councils were of the same mind, then that would be good. But I don't think they will be. And anyway, yep. Thanks.
Well, I don't see any other hands up at the moment, but look, just from where I'm coming from, I really find, and look, I fully support the position that we've taken as a council to belong to the communities for local democracy, and realistically, while there's 31 councils there, Auckland, although they haven't signed up to that group, if you take their population as well, because they're opposed to the reforms, but feel that they can go it on their own because of their scale. There's over half the population of the country that are in the camp of being opposed to the reforms. And one of the real worries to me is that we've got a situation now where even before the bills passed, the National Transition Unit's been established, and they're starting to reorganise the whole infrastructure in line with their proposals. So without any legislative backing, so it's completely well, I was going to say on the cards. It's almost inevitable that they're going to push through, and they may as well not have the select committee process, because effectively they can't even take notice of any of the comments that are made through the select committee, because the National Transition Unit's already been established. So whether they push it through with urgency or not, or they go through the sham of having a select committee process or not, is pretty immaterial. I suppose my concern is that from a council point of view, we need to look after the best interests of our community, and continuing to ask these questions right up to the 9th hour is really important. And I still can't believe that there are going to be the savings that are predicted. We're all going to see massive increases in our costs. The issue about stormwater is a really significant issue. And when you look at the Waikato catchment, which we're obviously involved with, less than 5% of the pollution in the Waikato is from point discharges. So the other 95% is coming from either stormwater or cross-land flows. So that's the area that we should be focusing on if we want to actually improve the swimmability the health of the whole Waikato catchment, not necessarily the point discharges. And I'm not suggesting that we put partially treated effluent back into the river at all, but it's hard for me to see how you can actually separate the stormwater away from the debate, and then you flow into the roading impacts in terms of stormwater off the roads. There's significant contamination coming off the roads. Is that the next part of local government that's going to be stripped away? Maybe it is. But at the moment, I still think supporting communities for local democracy is really important. At the end of the day, we might not be successful, but in terms of being able to hand on heart say we've tried to look after the best interest of the community, then we've done the right thing. There's been comment about there's not going to be any risk of privatisation because the ownership will be, if you like, 50% controlled by iwi. That's not my interpretation. Although the governance group is 50% iwi and 50% nominated or elected by the councils involved, the actual ownership will be in the Four Waters entity, not in that governance group, because they're wanting to use those assets to raise debt to actually do what we're doing now. So the issue about that governance group and the comments, I think Tuku Morgan has made them recently, is the best thing for councils, if we're concerned about ownership, is for iwi to have control. But we've already seen government with a stroke of a pen, when they have the absolute majority that they've got now, can just change the rules and those assets will disappear even further away from councils and the community's control. So look, I still have got huge reservations about whether this is actually going to be an improvement for the country. And when you raise the questions, you don't get answers. So until we can actually be convinced, then how can we be in favour of what the reforms are? But as I say, look, I suspect that it's just going to continue to be ramrodded through, go down fighting, I suppose, in some ways. But looking after our community's best interests is still paramount from my perspective. So, and the $5.24 million that is our share, that is really small potatoes when you consider the value of the assets that have been taken away from our control. The group is still waiting for the High Court determination on what ownership of assets means. It'll be a bit of a hollow victory, I suppose, when it can be legislated this way. But it would be really interesting to see what the court's ruling is on what ownership is, because the ownership rights, to me, are not being transferred to another publicly controlled entity. So anyway, look, that's my ramble. I'm still really convinced that we need to keep looking after the best interests of the community. And again, as I say, we're probably going to end up with the four-water entity model if I was reading the tea leaves. But at the end of the day, we can all look back and say, well, we told you it was going to happen, and the costs are not our fault, if you want to call it that. Philip, you've got your hand up.
Yep, thanks, Jim. Like you, like everyone, probably really disappointed, but it's no surprise with this government, with all their policies, everything that they've brought to the table. It's just been a mess, and we've got to make decisions based on very little information and facts and figures, and like you say, we've got to look after the community, and the only way we can do that with what we've got is just keep communicating with them and keeping us informed, so we're as educated as much about this as possible, so we can talk to them about it. But yeah, it's no surprise, really, is it? You know, that they've been, you know, just pushing things through. The only thing they're good at is handing out money, and with that, you know, that money, you know, we've got to, yeah, we just got to make sure we can use it to our discretion, really, with what projects that what's best for our community and for the whole region. So yeah, but yeah, it's just a bit of a mess, really, the whole thing. Really disappointing. Yeah, thanks, Philip. Just one point I forgot to just mention there is also that with the I suppose almost 50% of the country opposed to it, and I would suspect it's a lot more than that. National has publicly made the promise that they would repeal this legislation. That is going to be even worse mess if we've got a significant way down the track. I don't know how you unscramble the egg, but the important issue really is for changes like this, which are impacting on, I suppose, the democratic principles of the country, is if you don't take the whole population with you on the journey, then and it changes on a 3-yearly election cycle, it's just hugely disruptive and costly. So whatever the reforms that are finally settled on has got to have the support of the country. Otherwise, we're just going to flip-flop backwards and forwards, as we do with quite a lot of our roading policies on a triennial basis. So I just think that, and it's only what the communities for local democracy have been asking for, is to take time to actually get this review, the details of the review sorted out before you go launching in and just think that you can cover off some fairly significant issues without actually having them sorted out before you start down the line. Bill.
Yeah, I'm hearing what you're saying, Jim. I just know that, you know, that the history is that, you know, is that the governments do change, and so do policies change. And you know, my memory goes back to the state sector reforms and the forming of state-owned enterprises, a lot of which still exist, Jim. So you know, they weren't lost in any reshuffle that occurred. But it's, you know, this is not new space I suspect for most of the people on this committee that we're going through. This is what happens in election cycles, and yeah, I don't know that all of the concerns that are being raised that I totally agree with, and I certainly look back on the history that has occurred in terms of the state sector and state-owned enterprise reforms.
Yeah, thanks for those comments, Bill. And you're right, and but I'd say that quite a lot of those state sector reforms haven't worked well for local communities either, in seeing the centralisation of services rather than based on the communities that they were there to support. And I've said on a number of occasions, when you look at those state services that were in small communities, like Te Kuiti had a full range of state, whether it was railways or Department of Conservation or Wildlife or Forestry Services and Ministry of Ag, all working out of those communities, have been lost. And this is just another loss to local communities. But look, we could probably have this debate for a long time, whether they were right or wrong. Dawn, you put your hand up, and then Lou.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to say that with respect to the Better Off support package, might I suggest that once that legislation's landed, that I bring a report to the committee outlining both the source of funds, but also that wider context of the guidance that will be in at least that first draft of the legislation, and seek direction with respect to that funding. So hopefully that would be in the June Service Delivery Committee.
Yes, thanks, Dawn. Yeah, that would be really helpful, because if those funds are or have been created by the water services, then realistically any expenditure should go back to those, I suppose, connected consumers rather than the district as a whole, if that's where the funds have come from. But anyway, look, we've got some time to have a look at that. Lou and then Liz.
Yeah, thank you, through you, Mayor. I just agree totally with what Dawn just said then. I think we do need to discuss that, and that's a good idea, an excellent idea. I just feel that we've got to envisage this in the current existing situation that we're living in as a council. We're seeing a cost of living crisis. We know that. We're seeing the cost of everything escalating. We've got inflation. It'll be over 7%, probably close to 10%. I'm not going to get into those issues, but what I am saying is that we're doing this irregardless. We're heading down a siloed attitude. We're not actually having any information, and we are actually, as I agree with Mayor Jim, more than 50% of the population are against it, quite openly against it. And when you have that amount of angst, you will not see the legislation succeed. It will just end up being a complete mess. So I'm very, very much against what's happening. I agree with what Claire said. I totally concur that you did ask some very pertinent questions, Claire, of the DOC, and I agree, we just had no answers. The thing is with stormwater and all of these things certainly need to be addressed. But the big problem I have personally is that we needed TROY, and even TROY have yet to define accurately what their water standards are. So we're left still with many, many parts of even their legislation that are left open to interpretation. So I think that we need to have a lot more clarity, and they should actually demand from central government a lot more clarity on the legislation they're proposing.
Thanks, Lou. Liz.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So look, I guess that the new package of incentivisation, that's what we're wanting feedback on today, is it's actually really, really difficult, and I just want to support what Dawn has suggested. From memory, the time frame that we're working with here, even though the fund kind of opens now, we have until September, is that right, Dawn? So let's wait, let's see how things unravel. Agree with all the concerns today, but right now this just feels like another tranche of, I say incentivisation, I really mean bribe, and just, yeah, we've got time. Let's use the time we've got and wait. Hopefully this starts to become obvious as to what our next step should be.
It'll be a mess.
Thanks, Liz. Were there any other comments? I was just looking at the chat room. There's nothing there. Okay, Dawn, have you got enough to move forward?
Thanks, Your Worship. Yep, we'll bring a report back hopefully in June.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Dawn.